Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into what is honestly one of the most epic, high stakes stories in all of human history. It's a story of survival, of sheer resilience, and of human creativity going head to head with a totally brutal antagonist, the freezing cold. I mean, picture it. Imagine a time way before insulation, before centralized power grids, before synthetic fabrics even existed. We're going to explore exactly how our ancestors managed to endure some of the harshest conditions imaginable, long before any of the modern comforts we totally take for granted were even a thought. So, let's just jump right into the big question here. How on earth did we survive without electric heaters? Seriously, think about it. Today, when the icy winds start howling and the temperature drops, we just bump up the thermostat, right? Or maybe plug in a space heater. But for our ancestors, those freezing nights weren't just uncomfortable. They were a deadly threat. Winter was this relentless enemy that had to be defeated year after year. And honestly, failure to prepare meant certain death. Entire communities had to dedicate their summers and their autumns purely to the logistics of surviving the upcoming freeze. So how did they pull it off? How did human beings outsmart the deep freeze using literally nothing but the raw materials around them? Part 1. Fire. The ancient heart. To really wrap our heads around ancient survival, we kind of have to start at square one with the absolute most fundamental tool of all. For thousands of years, fire wasn't just, a convenient way to cook dinner. It was the literal heart of the home. To make it through those sub-zero nights, families fundamentally designed their living spaces right around the flames. They built massive stone fireplaces dead in the center of their houses, and this hub became the absolute core of their existence. It's where they cooked, where they socialized, and crucially, where they slept. The whole family would pull their bedding as close to the hearth as safely possible, just trying to stay warm enough to see the morning. Tending this fire, that was a full-time life-or-death job. If the embers died out in the middle of a blizzard, the temperature inside would plummet in minutes. Fire was, quite literally, their lifeline in the dark. 2. Architecture against the cold. But here's the thing. Relying on a central fire doesn't do much good if the shelter itself can't hold the heat, right? So people literally designed their homes to fight the cold. They didn't just build shelters, they built thermal fortresses. Ancient builders used these incredible raw materials to manipulate temperatures. Thick stone walls were super common because, stone acts like a giant thermal mass. It would absorb the radiant heat from the fire all day long and then slowly release it back into the room throughout the freezing night. In heavily forested areas, they built robust wooden cabins, banking on the natural insulating properties of thick timber. In some super extreme climates, communities actually use the Earth's natural insulation by living in semi-underground homes, letting the dirt shield them from those icy biting winds. But the most tedious and probably the most critical detail was the sealing process. Without modern caulk or weather stripping, families spent autumn packing every single crack and crevice with this mixture of mud, dense moss, and animal fur. The goal was simple but absolutely vital. Eliminate drafts entirely and trap every last bit of precious warmth. Section 3. Wardrobes for winter survival. Okay, so we've got the macro level sorted, the house. Now let's look at the micro level, protecting the body itself. Before we had fancy synthetic down jackets, survival basically came down to smart, strategic layering. People leaned heavily on thick layers of leather and animal fur. For hats, for gloves, heavy hide-wrapped boots, these definitely weren't fashion statements. They were absolute necessities to protect against frostbite, which, back then, could easily lead to gangrene and death. But the absolute superhero of the ancient wardrobe? Wool. Wool was incredibly valuable because of this one specific biological superpower. It kept you warm even when it was damp. Its fibers have this natural crimp that creates millions of tiny pockets of trapped dead air, which is literally the perfect insulation. Plus, wool contains lanolin, a natural wax that makes it water resistant. If you were out in the snow and your clothes got wet, that moisture could be a death sentence. Wool provided this critical, life-saving buffer, insulating the body and wicking moisture away, no matter how harsh it was outside. 4. The ancient heating pad. Even with the central hearth, the thick walls, and all that heavy wool, there was still one specific time of day that pushed human endurance to the brink: the night. Once the sun went down, temperatures hit rock bottom, and that big fire in the hearth would inevitably just burn down to coals. People obviously slept under thick blankets and animal skins, but they also came up with this brilliant, really intimate life hack to survive the dark hours. They basically created an ancient version of today's electric heating pad. Hours before bed, they'd take dense river stones or pieces of soapstone and stick them close to the fire to soak up the heat. Or they'd fill heavy ceramic or metal bottles with boiling water. They'd carefully wrap these heated objects in thick cloth or leather so they wouldn't get burned, and tuck them directly under the blankets at the foot of their beds. That meant before they even climbed in, they had preheated their sleeping space. It created this pocket of trapped radiant heat to get them through the night. It's just a stunningly simple but highly effective piece of everyday ingenuity. Part 5. The Roman hypocaust system. Now, if a hot rock in your bed is like a localized personal life hack, the ancient Romans took this concept and escalated it into mind-blowing, system-wide engineering. They were simply centuries ahead of their time. They invented this absolute masterpiece of thermodynamics called the hypocast. Instead of just having a fire in a room where, let's be honest, most of the heat just goes straight up the chimney, they engineered a massive structural furnace system. They built the floors of their villas and public baths elevated on stacks of tiles. A continuous fire was kept burning in a furnace outside the building. Then, the hypocast drew the intense hot air and smoke from that fire through the empty spaces beneath the suspended floors and straight up through hollow rectangular tubes built right into the walls. They were quite literally heating entire buildings from the ground up. The floorboards and the walls themselves became massive radiant heaters. It provided incredibly comfortable, uniform heat throughout huge stone structures without a single watt of electricity. I mean, an entirely grid-free central heating system built out of stone, fire, and just pure architectural brilliance. 6. Ingenuity as a survival tool. So when we step back and look at all of these tactics together, from a simple heated river rock wrapped in leather all the way up to the massive complex Roman hypocaust, a really clear theme emerges. Long before electric heaters or modern HVAC systems were a thing, people didn't just passively endure brutal winters. They actively conquered them. They survived through the careful management of fire, with smart, solid architecture, warm layered clothing using the total miracle of wool, and most importantly, relentless ingenuity. Every single piece of history we've looked at today reminds us of a profound truth. Human creativity has always been our greatest survival tool. Our ancestors flat out refused to be defeated by the elements. Our modern comforts, the thermostats we barely even have to think about, those are built directly on top of this incredible historical resilience and millennia of trial, error, and innovation. Which leaves us with this final thought. If our ancestors were able to use their sheer creativity to conquer the deadly, freezing winter using just raw stone, wool, and fire, without a single watt of electricity, what impossible challenge is our ingenuity going to solve next? When you look back at the brilliant ways humans adapted to extreme environments, it really makes you appreciate where we came from and, honestly, the boundless, untapped potential of the human mind. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep that curiosity burning.